excited to be here today celebrating the AWS developer community. My name is Drew Fearmont, and at this session we're going to go over to how to accelerate your cloud adoption with training. The original title for this session was WTF to AWS. It didn't quite make it through the copy editors. But understandably, when I really thought about it after I got some judgmental looks from my wife about the title, not everybody understands the acronym WTF, right? It's an international audience, and that's what they explained to me. And, that's really, really important as part of a community. You don't want to be exclusive in terms of how many acronyms you're using, right? You want to be an inclusive community. You want to grow that community. And you think about it with the AWS developer community, in some ways it's very exclusive, right? So we want to spin up VPC with an IGW, add EBS with EC2, put an ELB in front of it with RDS and S3. WTF is right. So I actually added some emojis here, which are a little bit more of the international language to hopefully help emphasize some points. So I spent most of my career at Capital One. I was director of operations and engineering, and I quickly learned that it's not about technology, right? It's about people. I was at a CIO summit with Werner presenting, and one of the CIOs actually remarked, I spend more time on psychology than I do on technology. So after spending a lot of my time at Capital One and driving talent transformation, migrating data centers to the cloud, I've joined a cloud guru, and now my focus is on migrating talent to the cloud, but doing it at scale. So as part of giving back to the developer community, I'm going to provide you some pro tips from my experience and the experience of others that have gone through these massive transformations. And my goal at the end of this session is that every single person in this room will have some very, very tangible methods for going back and making a difference within your community so we can continue to grow this development community within your organizations, right? And that's really, really important to me, to AWS, but most importantly, if you want to win in this environment, it's going to be very, very important to your organization. Because look, we all know the power of the cloud, right? Most CEOs, CIOs, everybody in this room realizes that this is essential, right? So I got First, I'm going to emphasize that with my emoji of love. But if anybody knows the other 30%, let me know the companies so I can short their stock, because I'm not too sure why that's the case. So I was at Capital One, and the CIO, like most organizations, realized that the real power of the cloud is leveraging it to your strategic advantage. Right? And that is fundamentally what we're trying to do by building a developer community that could leverage the power of AWS for a strategic advantage. And, but it's very difficult when you don't have the people. How are you going to leverage the power of the cloud when only 16% of these organizations actually have the skills to be able to leverage that? And that's really the crux of where a lot of organizations are struggling to kind of cross that chasm of adoption. And it's difficult. Our CIO was at reInvent a couple of years ago, and Capital One is all in on AWS, as many of you know. They were going through a very significant transformation to cloud computing. And obviously recognized the investment required in talent transformation, right? And that's something that I think we all need to really understand. This isn't a technology issue. It's about people. It's about everybody in this room understanding this and then building those communities. So you're here at reInvent because you're part of the committed change agents within your organization, okay? So now you have a responsibility to go back to your organizations and be able to make a difference and drive this within your local groups, your user groups, your community, your organizations to make a difference. So, look, it's difficult, right? Everybody here probably has some understanding of those acronyms that I just mentioned. And with 1,500 releases of features every year, it's just you're inundated with this new language all the time, and it takes effort. It's an investment, and that's really, really critical for these organizations to understand that. Okay, so is it worth it? There's a good study from IDC that talks about, when you really have a comprehensive training program, what's the power of it, right? And this last one, there's a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt within organizations about adoption. There's a lot of frozen middle. There's a lot of folks that are very nervous about not being included in this new paradigm. So how do you overcome that? Again, it's about the people. I thought this was an appropriate way to start off here. This quote is from a while back from Mark Andreessen's really famous article that he wrote, which right now, if he was to write this, it would be, AWS is eating the world, right? And in order to participate, there's no way through it than education, right? So how are we going to go ahead and do this? And more importantly, what can you do? So I'm going to go through a few different, there's really kind of three things, okay? One, you really want to engage your community, and you want to engage them at scale. So understanding the power of many. We're going to go through some very, very specific examples for you to understand and for you to be able to take back with you. Then the second one is the power of one, making it very individual, but also making it one community. One heartbeat, right? How do you go ahead and get that collective organism to work together as a community? And that's a very, very powerful approach to scaling education. And the power of we, right? So how do we as a community evolve that? How do you build a growth mindset within your organization? All right, so number one, the power of many. Cloud is a culture. AWS is the language. Okay? If you're going to have a culture and you're going to build a community, fundamentally, the language needs to be understood by everybody. Everybody. Product managers, scrum masters, your business leaders. Everybody needs to understand when I talk about I'm going to build a VPC with an IGW, with EC2s and EBS, fronted by an ELB with S3 RDS, right? Because if you're making decisions around whether we should put Oracle on EC2, don't do it, or use RDS, right? That's a fundamental acronyms that you should be able to quickly move through those conversations. When a Scrum Master sees an impediment on the board, they should understand EC2, compute, RDS, database, right? Those are just basic fundamentals, a shared responsibility model. So your goal is really to create this culture, okay? And that's you have to think about, this is not a technology problem, okay? It's creating this culture. And the first pro tip comes from my buddy, Werner. And this isn't just important internally, okay? So yeah, you're going to build this massive community of people that understand this language and this culture, right? But think about it in terms of if you really value German in your organization, okay, as a language, and you only have a few people that understand German, and you're relying on them all the time, and they're kind of sitting over in the cafeteria, those weird folks kind of doing weird things over there, but they're getting really highly paid. That's only going to get you so far. And for German speakers, they're going to kind of look at your company, and people want to work where they're understood. They want to be with their peeps, right? So when you have everybody speaking German, and it's the language of your organization, not only are you going to have people that want to stay around with their people, People want to stay where they're understood. But you're also going to attract Germans. In this case, people that speak AWS, right? All of a sudden, when they come up to your company, they're going to see basically it's Oktoberfest, right? You got beer and schnitzel or whatever else, right? They're going to want to apply there, and it's going to become very, very easy or a lot easier to attract talent because AWS is spoken here. So really kind of think about that in terms of not only attracting talent, retaining talent, but also sustaining talent. So we talk about language. Fundamental part of this is the certification. I learned this. There's so many benefits from being certified. First of all, it just establishes common knowledge base, common vernacular. It provides some credibility. You get some bling. Most importantly, you go to the certification lounge, which is great at reInvent. And there's also a what's in it for me. It's one of the highest paid certifications in the industry and one of the most valued. So when you have somebody in an organization that's responsible for 200 people managing storage arrays, okay? Those 200 people underneath them are going to be incentivized to pull those cables and put in those storage arrays, right? How do you get to them when they're being, their feedback is based on how good you're doing storage? Well, if you can kind of break through that incentive process by getting those groups to go ahead and drive through a certification and start really breaking down that language barrier and getting them engaged, that bubbles up pretty quickly. And pretty soon, it's pretty obvious the emperor's not wearing any clothes within that organization, and there's this much more of a comfort level of engaging in those conversations. So fundamentally, we'll talk about the certifications. It's a very, very easy and simple investment to be able to do within your organization. So what does it mean to be certified? What does it mean when you're certified? To me, you're an AWS expert. So my friend Simon Worley has this great graph here. It really talks about being an expert on a couple of different dimensions, right? And what you're really trying to move through here is being a hazard to your organization. There are so many individuals within organizations that think they know more than they actually know, and they're making decisions on behalf of your customers and your organization when they're really spelling AWS, WTF, right? And you have to be able to get through this, and you're really an expert, right? When you realize how much you don't know. That's when you're an AWS expert. There is no way with the volume of changes that AWS is providing, even the top AWS expert recognizes the gap between how much they know and how much they need to know. But knowing that gap is fundamental to having an organization that's going to be making the right decisions for themselves and for their customers. And that AWS certification provides that baseline. It provides the context that when you're sitting in the keynotes this week, you can start hanging the new changes and the new releases within a common framework that everybody can relate to. It's a very, very powerful metaphor just to bring back with you there and understanding that that's really what you're driving to. I don't care if you have 9 certifications, right? You're gapped, and that's okay because you're now an expert because you know how much you don't know. All right, so we all recognize that we want to go ahead and drive to certifications. We want to go ahead and establish a common language. You need to accelerate through it. You need to get there quick, okay? This is key. You're going to have a transition period. You're going to go ahead within your organizations. Most people are going to have a great vanity project, build a cloud center of excellence, get some wins, celebrate that we planted a bunch of flags in the cloud, and we're celebrating that, yes, we all know how to cloud. Aren't we awesome? Okay? Then your consultants will leave. Some of the other resources you have will leave. And you have this small group that now has to maintain all the stuff that was originally built. And then you're going to go through a trough of despair. Okay? It's going to happen. The goal is how quickly can you get through that trough of despair? Because if you wait too long, okay, that's an issue. And the reason why that's an issue is you're going to have more attrition than attraction. The people that brought you there in the first place, they're the pioneers of your organization. So I would assume that most people in here are pioneers. They're out there on the front end of their organizations. They're the ones that are establishing the first accounts, the first VPCs, experimenting with those services. You are wired to move forward, right? So once you build it, you really want to kind of turn it over to somebody that's going to settle it and scale it and eventually commoditize it. And if you get caught holding on to that for a long time, that is not a place that you want to be, right? You want to be moving forward. So you've got to build up this infantry that you can pass along what you build, the commoditized resources and the commoditized architecture to be able to sustain that longer term. By the way, not only did I have to change my title, I did have to change this emoji. Originally, I had a poo emoji up there. My wife was not proud of me, but the copy editors made me change that as well to a sigh emoji. So hopefully it's more appropriate and more professional. So that's my goal here. All right, so when you accelerate through, what does that mean? And what's the importance of accelerating through? If you accelerate 5 people through or 10 people through, does that really matter? No, you're going to be in an echo chamber. You got to get to critical mass, okay? Jeffrey Moore has this diagram about crossing the chasm for product adoption. So think about that in terms of cultural adoption. At what point is the inflection point that you can go ahead and start to take a small minority of cloud-fluent engineers, and that becomes the de facto language within your organization? So that was when I was at Capital One. I really was struggling with this because our KPIs weren't really moving as quickly from a migration perspective as I wanted to. And I was focused on the technology. And I realized it's not a technology issue, it's a people issue. So I went and found a great study that they solved this. They actually modeled this. So what they found was that if you can get a certain percentage of committed change agents to firmly believe in this cultural language or these beliefs, and once you hit this certain point, that'll become rapidly adopted by the majority. It spreads like wildfire. Okay, and they modeled this over and over and over again, right? So, and that percentage is 10%. Okay, if you can get 10% of your organization to be committed change agents, all of a sudden you're going to go from, oh my God, you're certified? That is amazing. That's to, oh my God, you're not certified? Why don't you just sit in the corner while we run this architecture review, right? Like everybody here is certified. It's like the de facto language, right? You got to get to that point. So that target becomes a really easy thing to be able to measure within your organization. And a committed change agent, by the way, is not somebody that just goes out and gets certified and then goes back to their cube and just hangs out. No, a committed change agent is somebody that is advocating on behalf of your organization. Not only are they certified, they understand how to apply those services within your organization, right? The bastardizations of AWS so you can be compliant from a regulatory perspective or whatever happens to be within your organization. But they're also paying it forward. Maybe running like a lunch and learn or explain and explore or things like that. They're actively committed to this culture. And when you hit that 10%, it does spread like wildfire. As a matter of fact, while I was at Capital One, I was measuring cloud adoption in terms of the bubbles represent how much are we moving to the cloud, how much are we migrating, how much data centers are we moving to the cloud. And then they were kind of bound by 2 different dimensions. One was how architecturally compliant it was. Is everything encrypted? Are we using multiple availability zones? Things like that. The other dimension was, hey, how cost efficient and how cost effective are we? Are we leaving our instances on all the time? Are we right sizing? And really the goal there, right, was to try to move to big bubbles in the top right. And I spent a lot of time struggling with our KPIs in the bottom left. When we correlated this and we drove through a certification process and created these communities, we hit the inflection point and we modeled it. You could just see all of a sudden, you hit this pivot point. And within some of our organizations, my mentor is in the room, Taryn Peterson, who ran the retail banking for Capital One. Over 50% of everybody in retail bank, out of 1,000 people, were AWS certified. And I could tell you, when I looked at the metrics for retail bank, they were in the top right. And some of the stuff, stop by the Capital One booth to see some of the things they're doing in the cloud, right? It's outcomes based. No CIO wakes up and says, how many people did I get certified today? But there's a correlation between driving these outcomes when you create those communities. And just like my friend, Anjanette, get certified among others. After we were done with this program, out of everybody that was certified in the U.S. for AWS, a full 2% of them worked at Capital One, which, by the way, makes it, if you think about that, language and attracting individuals. Hey, we speak AWS here. Most folks know that if they want to work on some pretty cool stuff, this is one of these organizations that you go and you work for. So hopefully that helps understand really the power of scale, right? You can't just go in and create a program for 10, 20, your cloud center of excellence, and you're going to just be in this echo chamber, and you're going to hit this trough of despair, and you're going to lose people. You have to scale it and commoditize the education in a way that you can hit that inflection point. Okay? All right. So I'm going to talk about the power of one now. So we've got the power of many, the power of one. This is really about, really the idea of creating one community, one heartbeat, this common experience, a common cadence. I spent a lot of time in my career focused on lean and agile methodology, so you're going to see a lot of this in this section here. And most organizations these days, hopefully, are taking advantage of some of these agile methodologies, right? So you want to time box your sprints, right, and be very, very focused on a weekly basis in delivering outcomes. So you just apply that from a culture perspective to your individuals. And most individuals within your organization that are still spelling AWS, WTF. And if you don't know, by the way, I know I'm using the acronym WTF, just ask a neighbor what that means. I don't want to get in any more trouble with AWS than I already am. They're standing in front of all of these acronyms. It can be pretty overwhelming, right? And you're just touching the surface. I mean, we're not even getting into all the crazy, awesome stuff they're doing with SageMaker and machine learning and AI, and these are really just sort of like your base services that you're starting off with. It can be pretty overwhelming. So just to say, hey, here's a book. Go to this one-day session. You're going to end up with hazards, right? People that think they know more than they do, and you're going to have some decisions that are made that are not going to be very, very well grounded. So when you drive towards a certification, a couple of things you want to be able to do here. The very first thing is break it up into sprints, okay? Very first thing, just break it up into sprints. And every week, you want to do 3 things on your board. Create a spike story, watch something, quick lesson, read a white paper, and actually do something, right? Do a little lab. And if you create those little spike stories, and at the end of the week, you're having your retro. What did we learn? Are there any impediments? Some really basic things. This isn't a doing and improving are one and the same, okay? This isn't an off-the-side-of-the-desk experiment. You have to invest in your talent and your people as much as you're investing in your DevOps pipeline, okay? So you want to watch, read, and do every week, and then at the end of the week, you can do these explain and explores, a retro. Great opportunity to start connecting the community. And what you can do here is a couple of things. So at the end of the week, if you all come together, right, you can expand out to do some self-directed learning during the week, but everybody's coming back together. And we're all in the same room, and I'm kind of checking in with everybody. Well, you've established some accountability, right? I don't want to show up and not have done my work, because you're going to call me out on it, and I'm going to call you out on it. But it's a positive peer pressure. And it also creates a great opportunity for others to give them visibility, right? I'll run the retro this week. I'll go ahead and I'll be the leader of the Explain and the Explore. I'll run this lab. And it's a great opportunity to create space for individuals to be able to step up. And I'll talk a little bit about it later, but it's also a great opportunity to be very inclusive in terms of who you're creating space for. Not just the loudest person or the biggest zealot of it, but create space for anybody to be able to step up and help move the organization forward. And look, this has had a ton of results here. This is not just some theory of, that sounds great, Drew, thanks for the pro tip. Like, there are major organizations and major communities that are applying this. Does that sound familiar up there, right? Get a 12-week program, you time box it, you go ahead and you create boot camps, you create opportunities on a weekly basis. Verizon had these things called dojos. They incorporate it with their agile methodology. They went, sound familiar, right? 10%, it's not just some random number out of the air, right? And that's the result in less than a year. And I would love it if you all stopped by the Verizon booth and just asked them what they're doing in the cloud, because they speak cloud. They get it. And the engineers there are on fire. And when they first started off, it was still new. But just rapidly were able to accelerate through that trough of despair. And now it's just they have inertia in this space. So that's really a very, very critical thing. If you take away one thing, it's you got to accelerate through this trough of despair using like this type of accelerator boot camp type of process, right? Set those targets and set those goals, and get to critical mass and get that inertia going. You'll have tremendous outcome. The other thing that you will learn from that is there's this common experience. So if we're all going through this together, everybody in this room was part of a 12-week program. And every week you went back and you studied, and then we all came back together in this room, and we kind of just did some retros. And we went through, and at the end of it, we got our certification. We just had a common experience, a human experience, right? Well, we're going to still probably connect. We're going to build relationships, right? We're going to understand, oh, yeah, you're going through this. Oh, that was cool. You learned this. Oh, I didn't know you did that. So there's this sustainability that you're going to have. You're creating communities within your organization. So now all of a sudden these weekly Explain Explorers turn into an internal AWS meetup. Then maybe the next one you're talking about serverless, and the next one you're talking about machine learning. Maybe then you're identifying speakers for the next meetup. Now all of a sudden you're attracting talent because you're out in your local area talking about what you're doing with AWS. That's all about sustainability. Okay. And part of that I mentioned before, there's this doing aspect. Outcome-based learning, it's not just this theory of, let me just go ahead and read some books and take the exam. You got to get your hands on it. Everybody in here should, everybody in your organization should have a free tier. Just like you have a home computer, you should have a home cloud computer, a free AWS account, and be experimenting with that. It's fundamental, right? Everybody should have an AWS free tier, and they should be experimenting with it. And getting your hands, and there's so many ways to get your hands dirty. Again, my buddy Taryn, as we were going through this and we were driving AWS adoption, he would turn to me and he'd say, well, have you experimented with EC2? Have you tried to attach and encrypt that EBS volume? Have you done it? You're asking all these developers to go do something. What are the friction points? Have you tried it? It's very, very powerful when you go and you actually experience it. But it doesn't have to be, these big architecture projects. Start off something that's very small. There's a few different examples I'll give to you here. So there's these IoT dash buttons. Is anybody familiar with these little programmable IoT dash buttons? Really, really super cool. great way to just start off with something simple, right? So this is one that I built. My daughter went to college, and I was like, oh, I want to still be a dad that she rolls her eyes at. So basically what I did is I just created a S3 bucket, put a bunch of love notes in there in a JSON format, and then there's a simple Lambda function that was actually templatized. So it was really easy for me to be able to connect to. And so when I push the button, it just goes through the request, invokes Lambda, pulls from the S3 bucket, sends out an SMS notification, and boom, she gets a love note from her dad. So yes, it's on the refrigerator, and I walk by it, and I'm thinking of her, and I just push the button. And but through that, it's very easy. All of a sudden, I just kind of got connected with serverless and Lambda and SMS, and very, very simple mechanism to be able to get your hands on and doing, right? So another example, my youngest daughter actually was diagnosed last year with type 1 diabetes. And within 15 minutes, we sat down one day, and she built this just right next to me. So it's next to her bed, and then when she pushes the button, I get a text that says, my sugar, I feel like my sugar is low, right? Pretty cool. And I actually tweeted out, and Werner responded with this comment. And this is the whole power of AWS that you're trying to get to this community, right? It's frictionless innovation. How do we leverage these services to build cool stuff and democratize it in a way that you can make it accessible, right? That these acronyms, you could break through them, you can make it accessible, and people can start building stuff. This is about development community, is about building and about doing, right? So there's great examples to just very, very simply go through that. And this is what Werner wants, right? Werner doesn't want you to lift and shift stuff and put it in the cloud and say, oh, we migrated. It's about innovation, driving innovation. Another thing, so I'm an AWS community here. I'm also an Amazon Alexa champion. And the reason for that is I use Alexa as a way to make outcome-based learning. So I just build these simple Alexa skills. But it's kind of like this Jedi mind trick, right? You're building this like little craft project that actually gets published on the Amazon store. And you could build them in an hour, right? They're pretty easy to build. But through that, you're getting a free tier account. You're doing a little bit of templating, scripting. You could access, go to an S3 bucket. You're getting kind of connected with AWS, but you're driving towards outcomes. So she actually built, I wanted to see what she can do. And I said, hey, you're the product manager. Let's go ahead and build a skill. What do you care about? Harry Potter. She built a couple skills. She got it out into production in 2 days. So from idea, intent to execution, frictionless innovation. Nobody asked her what data center it's in, what programming language, what DevOps pipeline, how are you patching, all that kind of stuff, right? It's like, here's her idea, and now it's like millions and millions of customers are available to her to provide feedback. So build, right? As a matter of fact, you can get rewarded too. I don't know if you know this or not, but that's always nice. So not only did she build that skill, she earned a few bucks. They have developer incentives, so her Alexa skill went viral. I got a call from them. They're like, hey, we have something to tell you. I was like, oh, I just got Alexa champion. This is, where do they want me to speak somewhere? And I got this email. It's like, well, your daughter earned money. I was like, okay. So yeah, she earned over the course of multiple months over $6,000. Yeah, so my daughter, being who she is, she was going on a school trip, which that funded to the UK, which she got to go to Platform 9 3/4, which was super cool, funded courtesy of Amazon. And she had some leftover money. So we talked a little bit about what to do with that. So she invested using Robinhood app in a couple of shares of Amazon stock, which has also served her very well as you move forward. So some great mechanisms to be able to make it democratize the education, make it very individual, making it about a person getting their hands on that experience. And again, back to this cadence here, using those breaks in the cadence is a great opportunity to be able to introduce these type of maker labs type of example, right? How can I go ahead and introduce something fun and engaging and build an S3 website, et cetera. Now we're going to go on to the power of we, right? This is all about evolution, evolving your community from a sustainability perspective, okay? So we talked about first the power of many, scaling, right? Then the power of creating one, so one heartbeat, one common experience, one common cadence. Individuals are learning with their hands on. Now it's about the power of we, from evolving this community as a collective unit. And I was really kind of thinking about cloud. It's certainly not a spectator sport, right? I grew up playing different sports, and I always hated that coach that was on the sideline screaming and yelling. I was just like, hey, if you think it's so easy, kind of get out here and do it yourself. It's much more powerful to have a player coach, right? And cloud right now, it's very, very early. I mean, it doesn't feel like it for many, but realistically, the adoption, we have a long way to go. So the rules are still being defined for what's the playing field, what's the scoreboard. So you could be a passive observer in this, or you can actually get involved and define what that community and what that culture is going to be at your organization. Jonathan Allen was a CTO of Capital One in the UK. And he tells the story, he's now actually with AWS as a enterprise strategist. Jonathan tells a story that he was up in front of his big town hall and saying, oh, I'm so proud of you who got certified. We have this list of people. It's great. And somebody raised their hand, basically said, oh, really, you think it's important? Why aren't you certified? Right? So kind of called them out there. And Jonathan, to his credit, went and actually got AWS certified and realized the power of not only doing that, but leading. And for me, it was very personal. Come back to my buddy Taryn here. He was my Jedi. He always did Jedi mind tricks on me. And out of the thousands of folks that were certified at Capital One, Taryn Pearson was the very first one to get certified. And he just didn't get certified and be like, hey, I'm certified, look at me. And he said, okay, well, I'm leading the way. Hey, Drew, have you gotten your certification yet? Very, very powerful to walk the talk. And here you see him teaching those Jedi ways to his young daughter. It's the ability to not only walk the talk, but then help to pay it forward within your organization. And every single person in this room has that opportunity to not only get certified, but always plus one. Right? It's not about you. If you want to, imagine if you had 100 people around you that were AWS certified, and things are going to be a lot easier for you and a lot more interesting, and you're going to be really having a lot more fun in your organization. So there's a little bit of self-interest there as well. And one of the ways that we did that at these organizations is creating visibility. So we created this thing called a cloud of fame at Capital One. Now a lot of organizations do this. And the idea is that when people get certified, right, make it very public. Right? Have the town halls, but then have the list of people that are certified within your organization. Because it provides a great opportunity, right, to say, I would have people come up to me all the time at work and say, hey, I'm interested in getting certified. I heard you're the person to go talk to. I'm like, there's 10 people over in your corner that are certified. Why are you coming to me, right? So making that visible does two things. One, people like to be visible, and they spend a lot of time. So one, it's like great recognition within your organization. But then I kind of pivoted a little bit, again, taking a page out of Terrence Jedi mind tricks, pivoted from a cloud of fame to a cloud of shame. Right? Oh, you're certified. That's great. How many people have you had certified? How many people have you helped out? Have you run any of these? We have these weekly workshops. Hey, are you willing to run a lab for us? Hey, have you blogged about what you've done? Would you be willing to speak at a meetup, right? Like, great opportunity to go ahead and create that visibility, but use it to your advantage. Don't go to the dark side with it, But another thing that was very, very powerful is gamification. It's amazing how gamification can drive behaviors within an organization. So imagine if I split up this room into these 4 groups, and then I say, the group over here looks like you're getting beat by this other group. How do you feel about that? Right? Especially if I have the front row is the leaders of each of these groups. Those leaders are going to feel like, man, I don't like being on the bottom of the chart here. Come on, group, let's go ahead and move this forward. So at some organizations, when you have the CIO accountable for hitting that 10%, and you make this chart very visible within your organization, it becomes a very, very powerful mechanism. And not because certifications are what matter. I can tell you when you go back to that little KPI chart, as far as how much we're migrating to the cloud in a well-architected, cost-efficient manner, where do you think Group C is on that chart? Small bubble, bottom left, right? There's a pretty massive correlation, and so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you don't have the people within your organization to succeed, you're not going to succeed, and ultimately you're not going to be able to achieve the outcomes that the cloud has to offer. But groups like Retail Bank, that have 100% of their mobile traffic going through AWS, and all of a sudden you say, well yeah, it's because we've trained everybody and everybody speaks the same language, and we've now hit inertia, and we're driving through the power of cloud. Very, very powerful mechanism to be able to do just something very simple like this. So another pro tip for you. Something I'm very passionate about. So when you look at your cloud of fame, is everybody on it look the same? And I realized that when I was going through some of these efforts, and the lack of diversity and inclusiveness, kind of like the rich get richer, right? The folks that are already kind of on the leading edge then learn the cloud, and then they continue to be the ones that are in the cloud and driving it. It's just this perpetual cycle. You have to be an active participant to make things inclusive as you're going and defining this new playing field within cloud computing and within your culture, within your organization. Again, you're defining the culture, right? And if you just let the same folks have access to the same thing, and then you hit 10% inertia, but they all look the same and they all talk the same, I don't really subscribe to that. And it really, really, really hit me a couple of reInvents ago. My friend Anjanette at Capital One, I had gotten my certification at the certification lounge, and I went up there. And they're like, oh, Drew, so excited to see you, whatever. Here's your swag, here's your badge, great. And Anjanette was right behind me. Anjanette had gotten her certification, and they were like, oh, my God, we're so excited to see you, Anjanette. This is great. She's like, oh, because I work at Capital One? No, because you're a woman, right? I was like, Anjanette's from New Orleans, and she started off as a mechanic, and now she's a cloud engineer, and she's pretty awesome. That did not go over very well with Anjanette nor myself, so I said, look, let's do something about this, right? So you have to be an active participant in being a catalyst for change as you create that we. So an example of that, last year, we sponsored several women engineers we work closely with Women Who Code, and AWS as We Power Tech. We sponsored several women engineers that went to the RoboCar rally and participated in building a self-driving, autonomous little car. Here you see Devin with it. Walk into the room out of 100 plus engineers. There are only 2 women. Crushed it, second place, right? Not surprising at all. right? More than capable to do it, and they're probably going to have a different perspective and do things differently. They crushed it. We got to create more space in our as we're going through this transformation for being inclusive and diverse. And of course, the best tip of all that I have for you as you're going through this, if you happen to go and do a robocar rally internally, Ann Jeanette came over a happy hour, and while she was building her model for her self-driving car, and she said, I was like, Jeanette, you can't be drinking. You're driving. And I was, well, you can drink and autonomously drive. So robocar rallies are the way to go, I think. That's a definite pro tip. So tomorrow, or Wednesday, I would really encourage you all to go to the We Power Tech happy hour. Our friends from Accenture there with Chris Wegman and his whole group that's doing some amazing work. They're really invested in We Power Tech. My friend Mark Noonan-Coven, who's an AWS community hero, and Trend Micro will be there. A great opportunity just to support the community and listen, right? And look for those opportunities to be inclusive and to hear what is being said. And for an added bonus, I have a bunch of those little IoT dash buttons. So I will bring them to the event and just come up to me with the magic words, We Power Tech. I'd be more than happy to pass that along to anybody just to experiment and have fun. So I'd love to see you there. It would mean a lot to me if you can bring yourself and your friends there. So look, you all have a choice here after going to this presentation, right? And I was, choices. What am I going to do? You have a choice. It's up to you, right? I'm not going to force you to go back and do any of this stuff. It's a very, it's your choice. It's an individual choice. I thought that this quote is actually a quote from my love notes to my daughter, right? This is one of the quotes that I found in there. Look, you could just be a passive victim. It's like, oh, God, I wish our organization would kind of get it together. Man, I'm doing all this heavy lifting. Or you could do something about it, right? And each one of you has the capability to make a difference within your organization. You don't have to be a SVP or whatever to go ahead and build a cohort to drive through certification and to start to drive to some outcomes, do a little mini hackathon, build an Alexa skill, blog about it. All of those things are modeling behavior for your organization. Okay. So look, at the end of the day, you got 3 things that you can do as you leave here, all right? So engage your community. We talked about the common language, critical mass, committed change agents. You'd be able to go ahead and educate at scale. So understanding learning teams and common cadence. And lastly, knowing how to pay it forward, right? So not just getting certified and going back into your cave, but actively looking to mentor others, leading by example, accountability within your organizations with like a cloud of fame, visibility with gamification and metrics, and make it diverse and inclusive, right? You're going to have a lot better outcomes. So that I would highly recommend taking that approach if you have the opportunity. Big pro tip, right? Keep being awesome. So I'm going to let you all out of here a little bit early so we can make sure we head over to the welcome reception in the expo hall. I'll be over there at the A-Cloud Guru booth. If you have any questions, if you want to connect, would love to talk with you. I would recommend, again, stopping by Verizon and Capital One and a few other of these organizations that have experienced this just to kind of get a sense. And then the We Power Tech, I'll hand out some IoT dash buttons. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great re:Invent.